Hi everyone, I hope you're doing well. Welcome to this new episode of INFJ Thoughts. In this particular episode, I'm going to be rambling about the question of meaning. And because it is an INFJ Thoughts episode, I will be connecting it with the INFJ type, with the MBTI model, which I only very recently tried to defend in a new video that had a title that would almost have suggested that I was going to dismantle it. But I like these little sleight of hands. So, meaning, looking for meaning. It's a difficult topic. It's a very difficult topic, meaning is. One that has interested philosophers ever since the dawn of time, but in many different ways and different relations throughout history, including the history of the philosophical discipline. But undoubtedly, I think we can all agree that meaning is something that is important to us. But it's a hard thing to define. It's a hard thing to define because obviously we can say, the meaning of a work of art, the meaning of a painting, the meaning of some scene at the end of a film. And in that case, we have a rough idea. It means what was the message that the author of a particular sentence, particular work of art, particular encrypted message, what was trying to convey. You know, you could imagine a Morse code message and someone coming forward and saying, someone who doesn't speak Morse code, asking someone else, what does it mean? Can you tell me what it means? You could even imagine someone speaking Russian and not understanding and asking one of your friends who's also seated at the table who speaks Russian, and I have a good friend who speaks Russian, and I could ask him, what did that person mean? When someone is making a joke or is being sarcastic and the other person or the recipient of the sarcastic comments didn't quite understood that there was something sarcastic going on, but didn't really understand the meaning of the sarcastic utterance, or in what sense it was sarcastic. All those things are manifestations of meaning. And yet, they're not what I want to talk about. What I want to talk about is meaning in the way in which, philosophically, but in our lives, we are looking for meaning. Most of us, and I would say, and this is going to be part of my arguments or part of my rambling in the next, maybe in the second half of this video, I would argue that one of the things that, in my experience, really brings together the INFJ and the INFP types is this very common, prevalent preoccupation with meaning. Not to say that only INFPs and INFJs are preoccupied with the question of meaning. I think that all types are, all people of all types can be, definitely. But in my experience, INFPs and INFJs are the ones that are the most concerned with the question of meaning in life. Having a meaningful life, you know. Despite the fact that they do not have any functions in common, these two beautiful types. So how come? It's a very interesting question. It's a way of trying to think about similarities between people of different types, despite absence of functions in common, in a certain sense anyway. But the meaning in which I mean it is really I think it has something in common with the concept of value. You know, what is the value of living? What is the value of life? Why do we live? Why do we live rather than kill ourselves, rather than drown? Imagine someone who's like, and there are many people in the world, way too many people who are destitute, poor, and there's a desire to live, to face adversity, Whereas in some cases you could have arguments that look horrible to us, and the reason why in itself they look horrible to us is really interesting to look at. That could be said about committing suicide when you're really unhappy or when you're really poor and you're suffering. In fact, in certain philosophies, and philosophies that are way older than some of you might think, such as Stoic philosophy in some cases, so you're talking about 300 BC at least, suicide was a rational option that was considered in case life was really too unbearable. But I think that to most of us it's quite clear that we struggle to live. Now, you could have a completely biological explanation to this, but I doubt that the majority of people would be satisfied with just this biological explanation. We seem to believe, I think in some sense, that there is a meaning to what we're doing. But somehow this meaning is elusive. And it's very hard to negotiate with the fact that everything that we do seems to be not everything that we do, but in order to remain engaged in life, in order to remain motivated, in order to want to wake up in the morning, take a nice shower and just go to work, it's important to most of us to anticipate, to contemplate, to be looking at something in the distance toward which we are projected, and that means something to us, that brings value to our lives. But it's very hard to say what it is, to say what is the logic behind this meaningfulness. And it's something that I find very, very interesting, trying to figure out the meaning of life. Is it 42 like in the movie Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and is the answer 42 a stupid answer as it's maybe superficially seems to be, or is it not a very profound answer that says whoever came up with 42 was free to come up with 42 because we're free to come up with our own meaning? But at the same time, we could argue that the idea that we have to come up with our own meaning is it could be incredibly stressful, because it means that every day constantly we have to remind ourselves of what we want to embody and why we do things. The why of why we do things is something over which we have responsibility ourselves. And it's a crushing thing sometimes to have that weight on your shoulders, which is why existentialists like Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, and Heidegger is a bit more complicated, but let's say Sartre. It's why they all talk about anxiety. You want to think, why do existentialists who promote human freedom and doing over essence, etc., why are they obsessed with anxiety, which seems prima facie to be something that does not really contribute meaning? But they say, well, it's because we know, I'm simplifying here, but we know that we have to come up with our own meaning, and the way that we can exercise our freedom is by filling things with meaning. But sometimes we're just tired. We just want to passively enjoy things without feeling bad about not investing them with meaning. And existentialists say that's the corollary of freedom. It's a form of anxiety, existential anxiety, that can be manifested in physical anxiety, which is a sign that we are, at the back of our mind, aware of our responsibility to create meaning. And as this sense of responsibility, like any sense of responsibility, is stressful in a sense, but we're talking here about an existential level of stressful. And what's really interesting, and to move on to the next part of the video, is that if you look at the great existentialists, people who are really interested in this question of meaning, in the history of philosophy, of literature, but also in forums that I frequent, there's a lot of INFJs and INFPs. Obviously, Albert Camus, French author, very well known, INFP. Soren Kierkegaard, very well known, claimed as an INFP by some, INFJ by others. Dostoevsky, very well known existential novelist, INFJ. So there's a lot of them. You also have INTJs, very few INTPs. I'm not going to go into that, but a lot of INFJs, a lot of INFPs are concerned with the meaning of existence. And so why is that the case, even though they have no functions in common in MBTI parlance? It's fascinating. I've only been thinking about it for a few days now, and so, this is a rambling video, so I'm not feeling too bad, but like, what I have come up with as a possible theory, if you like, is that in this case, clearly the hierarchy of the function stack has to be seen in a different way than we typically look at it. Perhaps the reason why these two types seem to be so concerned with having existence filled with meaning and with always asking the question of meaning is because they are introverted NFs. Because what INFJs and INFPs have in common, and there are many things superficially that they have in common, but when you dig deeper, you see a lot of differences. I think in the case of meaning, it's something that you don't necessarily see at first sight, but when you dig deeper, you see that they have that in common. So it's the reverse in this case. They're the only two introverted NFs, right? Well, actually, they're the two introverted NFs. Yes, that's the case. So they're of the idealist temperaments, like ENFPs and ENFJs, but they're introverted NFs. And to me, maybe this suggests that, so the one possibility is that this concern that they have with meaning is not explained by MBTI, by the MBTI model. And so that people who belong to these like family patterns of interest in meaning just happen to overlap or to more or less correspond to the INFJ and INFP categories in MBTI, but it's only spuriously connected with MBTI, if you like. You only see it on top of the real explanatory variable, which is a different variable. In which case, it'd be hard for me to tell you. But if we are looking at it in terms of MBTI and trying to see how we can explain the difference in terms of MBTI, well, I think looking at the INFJ and the INFP as introverted idealists, so introverted NFs, meaning that their main functions are intuition and feeling, but that they're also introverted. So we're not talking about whether the intuition is extroverted or introverted, and we're not talking about whether the feeling is introverted or extroverted. We're really talking about just the two main functions. In the INFJ case, it's NF. In the INFP case, it's FN. Always from an introvert's perspective. And so I'm thinking the intuitive sees always the big picture. So in seeing a situation, they see beyond the situation. So they see the situation not only as the situation, but as something that represents something higher, if you like. They look at the architecture behind the situation that is presented to them. And because they're feelers, they're going to see this architecture in terms of feeling. And maybe from this, the question of meaning arises. Meaning as the feeling architecture of any situation. And because they're introverted, this question and this projection into the architecture that represents the meaning of every situation from a feeler's viewpoint is introspected. And because it is introspected, it becomes part of the person's identity a lot of the time. They identify with the quest to invest or to project meaning into situations from a feeler's perspective. And this is my theory. This is why the INFP and INFJ, according to me at the moment, despite the fact that they've got no functions in common, because they're introverted INFs, perceive events and situations in terms of the architecture behind this, in terms of feeling, which corresponds to the meaning of those events in the way that they introspect a lot, to the extent that that introspection of meaning becomes part of their identity and therefore of their natural quest in life. Let me know what you think, guys. If you have a theory, please share it in the comments, and I will be talking to you very soon. Bye bye.